Welcome to this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital. I'm your host, Will Christensen, and I am super excited to have Matthew Holman here today. Matthew, tell us, or did we just dive right in here? Tell us why would an e-commerce seller who's kind of looking at this idea of monetizing his mental capital in a non-tangible way, why would they want to hear from you? What do you have to say about the topic, or what experience do you have monetizing your mental capital?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I've worked in e-commerce for quite some time, primarily on the SaaS side initially, but also what I've done over the last few years is built up a personal brand related to subscription expertise. And so for me, I've started dabbling in that part-time last year, and then this year full-time as a consultant. And essentially, I'm able to take my experience, my mindset, everything that I've seen work or not work on subscriptions, and be able to help educate people and make money off of that education, either through content and consulting.
It sounds like you got started in the subscription space. How long ago?
I'd say 4 years ago.
4 years ago,
maybe.
Okay.
I joined a SaaS company, bootstrapped as a co-founder to lead marketing. And the longer I was working there, I started to develop more and more talent for working with our brands, our customers directly, instead of necessarily trying to sell the SaaS or market the SaaS. So for me, a little bit of my journey also is figuring out what I'm really good at, where my skill set lies, what my wheelhouse really is. So there's plenty of things that I'm good at.
Yeah.
Things that I'm great at or that make me different than everybody else are fewer, and learning to focus on those. And many times those things are actually the easiest things to try to figure out to monetize, because it's really just about figuring out a little bit of sales and positioning. If anything, I have to remind myself on every call, like, they're most likely have never heard some of this before, or they just need a resource. No matter how much I feel like this is just the generic same crap I've said 50,000 times, everybody comes away from the call thinking, wow, this was so impactful, so helpful. Thank you. So what feels mundane to me, maybe not that in depth, is actually still really helpful for people trying to figure out subscriptions specifically.
So tell me, as you have kind of considered your approach and looking at some of the different pieces, you told me, pre this recording, a little bit about a unique perspective you have. Tell us a little bit more about that unique perspective and how that may help either individuals early in their career or later in their career consider something that they may want to shift in what's going on. Tell us about your unique perspective. Yeah,
absolutely. So what makes part of not just being in subscriptions, but what makes me unique is that I was incarcerated for most of my 20s and many for some of my 30s as well. So I came out without a degree finished, without really a career or anything like that in my mid 30s. And so I had this kind of like very weird kind of conundrum happening where I was really, really hungry and eager, like an 18-year-old, trying to just consume as much content and master technology and figure the world out. But at the same time, I had the maturity and wisdom of somebody who wasn't an 18-year-old, meaning I understood time management, I understood priorities, I understood communication and the importance of soft skills and all these other things. And so it's kind of like this weird thing where I identify very strongly with like the 25-year-olds of the world that are like maybe just leaving their first full-time job or starting to dabble in entrepreneurship as a 40-year-old. Right. Yeah. So that's what kind of gives me this kind of weird perspective of, I've watched a lot of other people. I've seen the types of businesses they built. Initially I kind of was drinking, I call it the SaaS Kool-Aid, this idea that the only way I'm going to like make a ton of money is by building a SaaS product and getting a big exit. Yeah. And realizing that that's actually a small finite group of people that make money and life-changing money, right? Like there's tons of other aspects, real estate, service-based businesses, right? Investing, all this stuff. So for me, that's kind of where my approach comes in, is I'm not tied to some idea that has to be right. I'm trying to learn and ask questions all the time, trying to help figure out what other people do. But also the other thing is trying to do it. I feel like I also am pressured in the sense of like, oh, I'll do that when I'm 30 or I'll do that when I'm 40. It's like, no, I'm 43 now. Like, I'm thinking about when I'm 60, I'll write a book. That's it. Like I'm trying to do as much as I can now and move fast and iterate and learn, trying to remind myself regularly it's okay to break things, at least in my own business, while I'm figuring it all out.
I love what you said there. I'm 37, so I'm not that far behind you from that perspective. And I think there are parts of me that are already jaded around, consuming new technology. And consuming new technology is actually one aspect that I'm a super fan of, like trying out new apps and getting all of those different things. I mean, you think about it, from 18 to 37, I mean, we're going on almost 20 years there, right? Of me interacting with technology and watching Zapier go from like 6 people who worked there to like
Right.
probably 1,000. I don't even know how many they're at now, but last time I checked, it was like 500. So like watching these different evolutions across the different pieces of that, I can totally see some of that jadedness. And there's a part of me that's a little jealous of some of that energy because I know how much I wasted. I really should not have spent as much time as I did chasing that rabbit hole.
The other interesting perspective is like, I often can fall into the trap of comparing myself to someone like you who's been working the amount of time when I wasn't able to, right? The things you're able to learn, wealth, connections. Like people in Utah view me as very well connected, but I've only been doing the connection game for like 6-7 years, right? Like I've only been networking. I don't have kids that I went to high school with in California aren't out here. So it's like, I don't have a high school network, a college network here in that sense. The other perspective is, I think that sitting on the sidelines for so long, I saw the same story play out over and over again. So I want to bring up just in the last few years, I want to bring up 3 quick examples of things that I think are really interesting from a technology perspective. The first is, I'll save what I think is maybe is the best for last, but in the last just couple of years, we all saw blockchain, Bitcoin, just 2 years ago was like, it's going to be transformative, change the way we all do business, all this stuff. And it got really, really big. And then several reasons it has damped back down again. Now, yes, Bitcoin, like there's here to stay. But my point is we see these waves of technology that's going to just change how we all do things. And everybody gets super hyped. And then the wave just kind of washes over us. And while that's now part of our life, it has not been that as transformative. The second one is AI. Right. So the last year and a half, AI has actually been around for a really long time. If you're talking about the differences between generative AI, right, and essentially machine learning in the other side sense, it's developing, it's being implemented, and everyone has been freaking out, losing their minds. Now, the truth is that AI right now is most commonly being applied as an assistance within operations, like automate things that are already automated or figuring out conversations. It will continue to be a part, but if you're like going to totally rearrange your life just because of AI, like that's actually a mistake. Like if it's something you can be passionate about and follow, that's great. The final one is the death of email, right? So I remember hearing this in 2015, 2016, 2017, specifically related to e-commerce. SMS was going to be the future. And while it has impacted some businesses, for anyone that's listening to this that's working in e-commerce, you know that SMS is not the number one channel that you have in your business. It can supplement email. It can be an okay reminder. And within subscriptions, many brands don't actually like it because it's an easy way to remind somebody of a subscription they pop and they cancel because you're limited on what you can market. So the idea that you're going to then now just totally stop doing email. So, and the reason I bring all these things up is there are several core things related to sales and marketing that have not changed and that will not change. And being able to position yourself as being able to add more value than you cost, being able to find people that really need what you're trying to help them with, those things aren't going to change. Whether that's you're talking about like doing a better hiring process for CDL licenses within trucking companies so that they can have a better, like I have a friend that works in that business and that's growing. It's massive, right? Like, so that's kind of the approach is the mentality is like, don't necessarily feel like you have to do one thing. Because when I got out, the irony here is that when I got out, I didn't want to go into marketing because I was 37. I've always loved marketing. I've always loved e-commerce. But I was a 37-year-old and I was scared that I'd be going up against a bunch of 22, 23-year-olds that know how to use Snapchat better than I do. And that I would just get crushed in interviews and jobs and all this stuff. And what ended up happening is I ended up in marketing because I still got drawn to the things that I was good at. And what I found when I was in marketing, that there are a lot of people that don't get it. There are a lot of people that chase the wrong things and that waste time doing other things or that aren't productive. So to me, that's like a really strong lesson of no matter how old you are or what you've been doing, you can figure that out. You're going to bring in things that other people can't do.
I think your perspectives, I love how unique that is. And I think that, you know, as we pick apart some of your newness, right? That the non-jaded look, and I hear you from the time wasting you mentioned. I don't know if it was time wasted, Will. You learned a lot. I hear you. There's an aspect, like you mentioned, time management and some of those other wisdom pieces that you learn just over the course of your life that you came to that table of a new career with that I think are very, very fascinating. Because like you said, you have an energy level similar to those who are starting, but the wisdom level of that are in that same category. So that's a unique gift mix that a lot of people don't have. And I even see it in myself. When I look at some opportunities, I won't explore it, because I'm using this vast technology or my past experience, all of my biases that I learned from 18 to 37, I'm carrying those around, right? So Chad Rubin on one of our episodes, he jumped on, he said, you know what, you want to make money? Go find something that everybody believes and challenge it. And so I think in many ways, you were given a gift that you're not carrying around all of the biases that I am.
True.
From having been exposed to all of that technology and all of those companies. I've watched companies start and fail that would probably be billion-dollar companies if somebody started them today. But I'll never go do that because I've already watched somebody start and fail. And so in my experience, that means that type of company fails, where you'll look at it and say, wait a minute, they just weren't considering, and there's new opportunity. So I think that's really cool.
And so much of it is timing, luck, alignment. And I guess that's the thing, is like reading so many stories. I think that we often try to like read other people's bios and all this stuff to try to unlock secrets. Yep. And for me, it's like the more and more I've read all that stuff, I found that there's actually a million ways to do things. Like I remember from a very young age, I was working for a guy who's like making insane money. And he had a degree in agricultural economics with a minor in winemaking from UC Davis. But he was one of the largest deal makers in California within the bond market. He was making, it was ridiculous money. So the idea that like, we have to follow this certain set of path or these certain trajectories is wrong. Like, you know, say yes to opportunities, you try things. I mean, for me, it's very much like, learning what I can be special at. It's also learning what energizes me too, right? Like I might be really good at some type of content creation, but some certain types of content creation are just draining and I don't want to do them over time, right? I want to figure out the ways I can be most impactful because that's going to allow me to make more money too.
I think it's fascinating to consider that aspect of what's there. I mean, we're talking about like timing. So Dimitri Verona, he's the guy who he's now one of the founders of AMZ Innovate, another show that happens in New York. He's like very, very knowledgeable, has tons of experience. If you want it, probably one of the most interesting podcast episodes we've had has been his episode. And he talks about how guitars.com, like he built literally like a music store, online e-commerce, ran full page ads in the New York Times. And the whole thing just didn't go anywhere. And now there's like a multi-million-dollar e-commerce brand built doing the exact same thing. Right. It is no different than what he built. He was just 5 to 10 years too early. So I think your unique perspective is all that bias is not there and you get to look at that world through that lens. So, I mean, very, very cool perspective to bring to the table here. So to get into some of the questions that I ask on every episode, one of the questions I like to ask is, when was the first time you can remember monetizing your mental capital? And this could be, some people talk about lemonade stands. I've seen all sorts of different answers to this question.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that for me, there are some instances from when I was a kid, and we could probably tell some pretty interesting prison stories. But I think that maybe like the most relevant, I had not yet started consulting, but I was like the director of marketing at a company and I was in a chat or in a Facebook group and somebody asked a question and I just commented a simple like solution. Somebody else sees that comment and DMs me on Facebook asking if I can do consulting because they've got a similar problem they're trying to figure out. And that's when I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, I can. You don't know how to do this. And for me, it's something I've figured out how to do. So I'd be happy to do that. And figuring out what to charge and all that stuff is maybe a different story, but that was probably the first time. And that was like maybe 5 years ago. And that's kind of what started me with the consulting bug, what ultimately caused me to leave that director of marketing job and go the entrepreneur route.
So I actually do want to pick that apart a little bit. We haven't had a lot of discussion around the pricing. And I think part of that is because a lot of people's stories are so much earlier. They don't have that side of it. So let's look at that a little bit. They were like, hey, you want to do this consulting thing? My immediate thought, and this happened to me as well, when I realized, holy crap, they actually might pay me for this. I've been helping my friends for years with X, Y, or Z thing because they knew I knew about it. And that kind of naturally spreads to your friend group. We all have that guy that we call when like the car breaks down. You're like, can you just talk me through what I should do? Like, I don't want to go to the mechanic. And he's like, yeah, you're my buddy. And, he'll talk you through it. Well, when you looked at it and realized, wait a minute. Yeah, I actually could do that consulting. What was that thought process like?
Yeah, well, it's imposter syndrome, number one, because you feel like, like I'm working like a director marketing job, like, and it's okay. And I'm making like, I don't know, maybe $35 an hour once you like translate the salary. That maybe doesn't include benefits and stuff like that. So maybe it's higher. And then you're thinking, I'll charge $50 an hour. And then now it's like, if you break down some of the work I do on subscriptions now, like my hourly rate would be kind of insane.
Yeah.
I've done $500 an hour consult calls.
Yep.
Right. Like, and that's maybe at the lower end of some of the things. It's like, my opinion on this is really interesting for me. It's like selling SaaS teaches you a couple really important lessons. The first is this. Say I have two tiers. I have a low free plan or like a $50 a month SaaS plan. And say I've got like a $1,000 a month SaaS plan. And the $1,000 a month has all these bells and whistles and features and all this really cool stuff. But it's also like maybe the thing that I do that your software does the best. What ends up happening when you sell SaaS is you acquire tons and tons of these people on the free plan or this $50 a month plan. And those people bitch and moan about price all day long. We all do it. We've all been there. I mean, anybody's listening, same thing. I'm wondering, why does this tool cost this much money? But the truth is that for people that are complaining about price, it's because it's not driving enough value for them. There's not a good alignment. They don't see the value. There's something there that's missing, right? You can still sell to them. They can still use it, right? But then you have people that are on the $1,000 a month plan. We're talking like one thing that you do that makes their life inordinately more simple or efficient or time saving. They don't think about it, right? And so within subscriptions, the same thing is like, if I'm talking to somebody who's just getting started on subscriptions, they're not going to buy like a $5,000 consulting package or something like that.
Yeah.
They don't need it. What they need is an hour here or there to check in, right? A brand with 10,000 or 100,000 subscriptions, that's 10, 20, $30 million a year business. Yeah, they need the $5,000 an hour consulting package because they've got tons of things they need to figure out and get right. And if it works just a little bit, they're going to make millions of dollars. And the reason I bring that up is within consulting and like this idea of like monetizing your capital, I've seen this journey happen for myself and for almost every consultant I know, is you start out underpricing what you're doing and you aren't necessarily working for people that value it as much as you want, but you're doing it to get reps in and you're doing it to try to get more experience in selling and delivering value. And then you're slowly or quickly starting to raise prices, but you're also trying to figure out better at who you want to sell to and who you can deliver value for, right? A great example of this is like coaching. I've never done paid coaching until last year. I had gone through something like fairly like impactful and it was negative and it was affecting me. And I met somebody that was a coach. And when they said, hey, I help people get more time back so that they don't spend as much time like worrying in their head about what's going on. I'm like, oh, wow, that is so me.
Yeah, I'm worrying in my head right now.
Yeah, I'm worrying in my head right now. It was expensive, but the process worked for me. And the idea for him was he wants people that are trying to figure this out right now, not something you're going to use in 6 months or next year. And so doing it started to free up mental capacity for me as well as mental health and happiness. So it was like a $5,000 coaching package or $6,000. Like it was insane. I've never paid that much for anything in my life, but the impact was immediate and it was powerful. And that coach has continued to charge more and more money because more and more people are coming to him. But the only people he wants to work with are people that are like, there's certain people he'll say no to because you're not in the right place for this. It's not going to help you. It's not going to be impactful. So you're going to question the value and you're not going to want to pay that kind of money. But all these other people are in the right spot. And so that's ultimately where we try to go with this, like figuring out pricing and stuff is like, yeah, $50 an hour to do some, like build up some emails or help set up a Shopify store. But now it's like, I'm trying to figure out, I don't want to do that stuff. The whole idea that I would get paid hourly to go help set something up, like that's not the best use of my time and how I can be impactful. There's a million people that can help you set up your email for $50 an hour. I'm a subscription guy and there's not that many of us.
I love what you said. Can't even remember who it was. I think it was a book. I'm going to butcher it. Maybe you'll remember the book. But I remember I was asking that question, how much should I charge for my time? And in the book, or maybe it was a mentor, they said, look in the mirror and just keep telling him in the mirror or her, I charge $50 an hour. I charge $75 an hour. I charge $100 an hour. And just keep going up until you say it and you laugh out loud. If you say it and you laugh out loud, okay, go back to that, whatever tier it was right underneath that. Go with that for now. And that was the way they were like, here's how you choose your price. And so like, if you say it out loud, you're, yeah, really? No way. They're going to see and feel that, right? I think it's fascinating when you consider pricing because pricing really has nothing to do with cost. And that is, I think, the number one thing I've seen initial entrepreneurs or consultants do wrong, and you did it perfectly.
Well, I would say that when consulting, you start to feel like if you start to break everything down by hourly, that's actually a mistake too, because what ends up happening is brands start figuring out how much they're paying you hourly, and then people hate it, even established brands. So it's like, I was pitching it. So one of my most like basic audit subscription packages is $2,500. And depending on the brand, it could take me anywhere from 2 to 10 hours. So conceivably, when I first pitched it, somebody was like, oh, 2 hours. So I'm paying you $1,125 an hour, or 11, whatever that, $1,250 an hour.
I'm like, guessing you didn't get that contract.
I ended up discounting it for them because he still saw some value, but I did. I had to discount it. So now it's like, hey, it's not about hours. It's about outcomes. It's about deliverables. It's like, okay, here's your problem. This is what you're going to get when we're done. This is what you're going to be able to do when we're done. You don't need to know how much time that takes me. And again, it's fluid because those projects can be as short as 2 to 3 hours. But most of the time they're somewhere between 5 and 10. So it's like, but even then, if it's only 10 hours, it's $250 an hour. If I go around saying I'm $250 an hour, some people are going to be like, okay, whatever. They've worked with high price consultants. I don't think that's that high price considering some other people I know. But for like the idea that they could go off of Upwork and get somebody to help them with like, subscription marketing or email marketing for $35 an hour. If somebody's in your mind, and this is a consultant that gave me this advice, if somebody starts thinking about what you do hourly, you started to lose, because they're going to start comparing you to everybody else that they meet instead of comparing value. Like, hey, wow, this guy says this guy's only $50 an hour, but he only does this and this. This guy does these projects. They're much more expensive, but wow, look at what he's done for so and so and so and so and so and so. And look what he thinks he can do for us.
Gotcha. Interesting. So, I mean, really, you've got an interesting perspective on that. And I love what you said, like, it's about outcome. And so if you're just starting out, you're just trying to figure out that price, how do you recognize value is a lot of times what people are willing to pay? So how do you go figure out what other people offering this at X, Y, or Z? Like, what would you do to go figure out that value question?
Yeah, so it's certainly a learning process, but just to get started, like you can look at Fiverr and Upwork. You can also you can maybe talk to people on LinkedIn. But I think that you have to do two things. One, I think that it's really important for me personally and for everybody. You can't get too lost in the thinking what somebody else is charging for something that you're doing the same thing, because then it's like that whole idea of like envy and comparing yourself to other people. You're not going to be happy. So the idea is like, hey, if I charge $50 an hour and I could be really happy making $50 an hour, like, don't worry about charging $500 an hour. Like, charge what you feel like you can make good money at. And then regularly you can check in and evaluate whether you should be charging more or what other people are charging, right? I do try to pay attention to feedback from people like, oh, wow, that's really expensive. Or when people don't blink and I'm like, oh, geez, I could have doubled it.
I know when I've left money on the table because, yes.
Let's get started.
Sounds great. Let's get started.
Yeah.
That is a perfect indicator that you left money on the table, period.
So for me, it's like a process of like getting feedback from people that I'm working with, right? And like, so the guy that, like I said, I mentioned the price came down. He loved the work that I did. But for me, they were a little bit smaller in size from an e-commerce standpoint. So I feel like the impact I had for them wasn't necessarily the same as I had for a $30 million company, right? From a revenue standpoint. But from a time saving, like feeling like they've got to figure it out, like they felt like I did a great job, which is kind of the whole point. But it's also like getting feedback on, okay, now I'm also thinking about the more I do this, the more I'm thinking, all right, for these types of brands, they already have this piece in place, this piece in place. I can come in and crush. They're going to see immediate value. It's going to be really impactful. And they don't have sticker shock at any of this stuff. But when they don't have some of these pieces, there is sticker shock. So it's like, do I want to price something differently for those types of people? Like, I'm not in this position where I have so many leads that I can just say no to a bunch of people. I'm still trying to like build up all of my retainer, recurring revenue, all that crap. Like, but that's kind of the mentality, is getting feedback. You can do research, but also not getting too caught up in like, you find out that somebody that is worse at it than you are and they charge more money. Like, that's their journey and their path. So don't get too caught up in that, but do pay attention to market forces as much as you can. I think also finding out like what people are paying somebody in-house to do that, what they're paying agencies to do that. You can pay attention to all those kind of figures, but ultimately it should come down to like what you feel comfortable selling, what's making you good money, and what you think is repeatable and scalable.
Totally hear you 100%. I think there's a very important piece of this that is just literally abundance mindset versus scarcity mindset. If you approach that sales call with that scarcity mindset, you will undervalue what you have. You will discount what you have. I jumped off the phone the other day with a lady named Valerie Cobb, and she is a chief revenue officer. It's funny because she talks about like chief revenue, and she does this fractionally for a couple of different people. And I don't know exactly where she got some of these stats. So we're going to have to Google it afterwards to find out. But the stats were like, whoa, I got to think about this. Because you mentioned like, hey, I'm still building this. And so I can't just turn down all of them. I want to share something with you that she told me that like has been a light bulb moment for me. And it's something that I've been practicing over the past 3 or 4 months. And I've seen a shift in my lead flow to the point where my problem is not leads anymore. My problem is a sustainable process to close them as quickly as they come in.
Okay.
And as I started to shift that, I was like, holy crap. Okay, now I got a different problem. So I want to share some of that wisdom. And she said it very, very well. She said, there's 2 things. One, never, ever, 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 ever use the word discount. And she was like, if you use the word discount, you're immediately showing the customer that you don't value it as much as it is there. She said, you can get alternate currency for whatever it is. So like, I am giving you this below market value rate for my service in exchange for your time once a week, giving me feedback on the service, or in exchange for a commitment for a year that we're going to work together. And you can give them something that for them, they feel like, oh, that's totally worth it. But in their minds, they have to see you're getting the full market value every time.
That's interesting. Is I'm telling you that I discounted, but what the conversation was, I'd be willing to go lower in exchange for a case study. I get to talk more about what we do. We'll go through all that. So I'm not like revealing the secret sauce, but that makes it valuable for me to work on your project for less than what I would normally do.
I love that. I would even say that term lower, I would be willing to go lower. That means I'm willing to accept that my thing is lower.
Okay.
I would be willing to go below market values. Market value has not changed, brother, but I'm willing to go below market value, or I'm willing to go to this, which I know is below market values. You're essentially
I like that.
setting that. And I was like, okay, I'm discount. I've crossed that word out from my vocabulary. I don't even use that word anymore. This is yesterday. So we'll see how long this. The second thing she said was 91% of customers, if asked, will give a referral. And I was like, whoa, I got to go Google that after we get off this podcast and find out what, like, she's a very knowledgeable person. She's coming and giving a speech inside our community. Like, I'm actually fairly confident because I've seen that too. Now, obviously, you got customers that you don't ask for referrals because it was a bad experience. Sure. But even the ones who are still customers who had a bad experience in the past, I found that those are sometimes your most dogged followers. So 91% will give a referral if asked. And we as entrepreneurs just don't put the systems in place to ask.
I was thinking about that just yesterday, actually. I have 2 clients I recently completed work for, and I've used them as referrals that when people ask, hey, can I talk to somebody else you've worked with? And both of them are giving like glowing, astounding reviews. And then I'm sitting there thinking, you should probably ask them if they know anybody that I should be working with or that could use my help.
100%. And I guess the other thing I would say, I'm curious, I got to go ask her where she got that stat. And then secondly, I'm going to ask, how often? Because I would actually be willing to bet that every quarter, you might be able to ask monthly. And I think that's because our sphere of influence, we as human beings carry around a group of people who are our immediate connections, right? Think about who can you remember that you've met with? You probably can only remember 60 days, maybe, of the people that you've met with, and only the ones that are most impactful. And so we carry around this memory of all of these people that we're talking to. I love giving referrals. So my buddy that I actually texted a buddy of mine who's a subscription guy, and he didn't respond back, which is why I didn't refer him over to you. But I will tell you what, I'm going to text him again because I know that if I give you a referral, that's emotional currency I can withdraw later, right? I want to give referrals. And so every 60 days, it kind of flushes. Our brains do that naturally. And all the new people I've met with, they might need a subscription guy, but I don't remember who you are.
I totally agree with that because, I mean, for me, I think it's so fascinating is that we're all always thinking that like, and it's a little bit of fragile mindset. We are always thinking, oh, well, so-and-so knows what I do. Like if they had somebody that they could refer me to, they would know it. But the truth is they don't until you actually ask directly. Like you have to ask. It creates a connection in their brain. They're like, oh, actually, yeah, just yesterday I met somebody or last week I was having this conversation over dinner about how we work together. And you're like, in your mind, you're thinking, well, you could have referred me right then. But it's like, no, they just were talking about you. And now you're reminding them, hey, do you know anybody that could use my help or that you could refer me to? Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like being able to do it regularly. I do think it does depend because like in the SaaS side of things, our subscription business, we struggled to get our customers to do referrals, partially because a lot of them felt like they were insulated. And this is not within Shopify. This is WooCommerce, which is a little bit different than Shopify. The Shopify community is very much like just sharing tactics and what's working. The WooCommerce one can sometimes feel more fragmented. And so a lot of people were like,
I don't want to tell anybody about you because you're my competitive edge.
Right. So we would get that. And also like, they'd only worked at one or two companies. Most of the people that have tons and tons of e-com experience, there are some in WooCommerce, but Shopify is becoming more and more. That's the dominant force, Magento to a point in Salesforce. But yeah, within Shopify, it's like totally different thing. It's like the community's strong. Everybody's friends with other brands. They're learning from other brands. They're stealing the playbooks of other brands, not from direct competitors, or maybe they're trying to steal from direct competitors, but they're not friends with their direct competitors.
Yep. It's a mindset thing, kind of that abundance mindset, like I've talked about before. And so I would say, don't knock until you try it, right? Go ask. And if it's a poor experience, don't ask that customer again, right? But that's that 91%, right? 1 in 10, you're not going to get a referral from. And I would be willing to bet in any industry, it's above 50% that are willing to give those referrals and kind of lean into that. Here's the next statistic she gave that I'm going to have to go find this one. 1 in 4 referrals close.
Yeah, I'd say higher than that.
I would too. I actually said the same thing. I was like, for me, it's like 60 or 70%, I feel like. So the thing that I have changed and shifted, Matthew, in my experience, in what I've been doing over the past 3 months, is I have been treating every single person I've been getting on the phone with as a possible referrer to the 3 or 4 different businesses that I'm trying to run right now. And every single one of them, I open the call and we talk about it. And we did this on our very first call that you and I talked. I asked, who do you need to meet right now? I believe in the law of reciprocity. And so if I can get you a referral, you're going to be like, oh, who was Will wanting? Okay, Will was wanting to meet these kind of people, right? And so we're going to create that reciprocal relationship. I meet with lots of people. And so I'm doing like 6 calls, 7 calls, sometimes 10 calls a day, which is a lot. And that's just because that's the role I'm filling in these different companies that I'm in. Even if you're doing 3 calls a day, get on that call, ask that question. Who do you need to meet right now? And then the second thing you got to do is share impact stories. And I've learned that impact stories are those 30-second things where you show them a picture into a new world, and it's the new world that's created through your product or services. So the new world is, I had this guy, I met him, he did X, Y, or Z, and at the end, like we had an amazing experience. So an impact story for me inside Seller Labs, we met this guy and they're struggling with leads. They're looking for a way to like build up more and more and more and more leads. They're an agency. We helped connect them to an automated audit process that makes it so they no longer have a bottleneck in the flow for doing audits for new e-commerce clients. So we built a connection that makes it so that the customer comes in and the new seller wants an audit. They go in, authenticate, lead gen happens in the middle of there, redirects to a Calendly link, and boom, the lead part of it's there. 24 hours later, the reports are sitting there waiting for the sales guy who's already been trained. So one analyst, like one brilliant strategist comes up with these reports, and then the sales guy who's been trained how to read the reports and just look like a rock star reading them. So the analyst, that genius, is no longer the bottleneck. He doesn't have to create a new report. He doesn't have to build anything new. He doesn't have to pull any new data. It's not about pivot tables anymore. It's about just click, 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 click. And so we remove that bottleneck. And that is one of the superpowers that Seller Labs is handing out right now. Now, as I told you that impact story, you thought, oh, that's actually kind of cool. And now the next question I ask is, Matthew, who do you know who might have a bottleneck with some sort of brilliant analyst that could use some help with some of that data? And there are people popping into your mind right now, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Right? So now, because we've connected and because this person doesn't seem like a charlatan, I mean, we've only connected twice here, right? But how did I meet you?
Well, we were LinkedIn connections.
We were LinkedIn connections.
Mazzaros said, "Hey, you should interview Matthew."
Well, we talked back and forth.
We did a little bit.
His first response. So just for the listeners here, Matt actually blew me off hardcore. The first time I asked him, I said, "I'll buy you lunch," and you said, "What do you want to talk about?" I didn't come as a referral, and so because I didn't come as a referral, Matt and I actually live pretty close. We're both here in Utah. Like I had a bunch of the juju that might have gotten me through the door, but because Dan Mazzaros didn't refer me, I didn't come with that warm connection. Dan said, Will, Matt, you guys need to meet each other. You're both genius people. And that trust from Dan transferred a little bit to me, got us in this call. Now we're on this call. So like this stuff works, right? So I came as a referral and you're thinking about what's there. So that's what I would challenge you to do is come back with that impact story, share it on every single one of those little calls. And then don't be afraid to say, hey, who do you know? Why don't you connect me to that person? And then who do you know who might need? And who do you know who might know someone who would need? And I found that our 60-day sphere of influence that we're carrying around behind us, they will know one of those two things. They will either know someone who could refer me to someone, or they will know someone who is in that category. And so I've just started like pushing on that. And this podcast is one of the ways that I push on that. It's a fantastic conversation starter. We're pulling out direct insights right now. These e-commerce listeners who are listening right now are like, oh my gosh, I need to start meeting with 2 or 3 people a day to just build out my product or service. And so that's what I've started to push on. And I found that that's enough to get a SaaS business off the ground. That's enough to get a productized service off the ground and to build it to the point where you have a large enough team that you can start going after the other channels. I'm going to go do some more social media, but because it's uncomfortable to ask, a lot of people don't.
I totally agree with that. And yeah, I mean, really, ultimately, it's about how we're perceiving people that are approaching us or talking to us. We have gates, we have walls, we putting people into boxes all the time. And then referrals often like just break through that because it's like this whole idea of like, hey, this is my buddy. Like, oh, well, I like you, so I'm going to listen to what this person has to say without the same bias I would somebody who's cold calling me or something.
Dan was on the podcast, and at the end of the podcast, I asked him, who else should I be interviewing? Who else should I be talking to? And he said, you need to meet Matthew Holman. And he told me a little bit about what you're doing with the collective stuff and just the different pieces. And I was like, I do need to meet Matthew Holman. And then the funny part was, I went into LinkedIn and I was like, oh, that's hilarious. I've already been trying to meet Matthew Holman. And so it's about making those warm connections and leaning in. And so the category that I was put in originally may not have been the category that I'm in now with that referrals. And it shifted a little bit, it sounds like, because here we are.
For the most part, our initial conversation was related, like I was looking at maybe hiring a VA and I was trying to not talk to agencies. So you weren't the only person that I was kind of giving a cold shoulder to related to like that type of outreach. But then when Dan connects us, then we also get on a call and start chatting. I'm like, oh, wow, that's just one little aspect of all the different things you're doing. The VA agency part isn't necessarily that interesting to me or what I need, but all these other things are really, really fascinating. Let's talk about that stuff too. So I think that's also like kind of like a big part is people are skeptical. I mean, I've had things where somebody I worked with last year and they're like, yeah, a lot of my team thought this was just going to be a waste of time. You're just another expert, quote unquote, who's not going to be able to help do anything. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize like people were dealing with that. But it's true. It happens all the time. I do it. Everybody does it.
You're making me realize when I reached out to you on LinkedIn and shared some of my thoughts and different pieces that way, I probably needed to do a better job of sharing some of my impact stories around that VA stuff for what's there. Because I built a process where I matchmake entrepreneurs with young entrepreneurs and I create explosive growth through those matchmaking. I was trying to clone myself. This is my cloning technology. I've now found USU alumni, but Utah State University alumni that I can pair with an entrepreneur and I find integrators in embryo. I knew I was onto something when my apprentice came to me and said, I think it's my turn to take a pay cut. This was a couple of years ago. I was like, your turn to take a pay cut? And they were like, well, I'm in this with you. You've taken the pay cut up till now because we're trying to figure this out. And it's my turn because like we're in this together, right? And I was like, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this journey. And I realized I was onto something. And I think had I gotten on video on LinkedIn and shared that with you, a little bit of impact story. So what's going for me? Impact story, impact story, impact story. Okay. We got to learn our little impact stories and share them ad nauseum with people because it's just so much different.
And the ad nauseum, I mean, talking about that, I think that I've learned this in the last few years of my own like social media, personal brand building journey is that we're often so consumed with trying to come up with original content over and over and over again. But the truth is there's like 2 or 3 things that really matter and you should be talking about them over and over and over again. There are going to be some people that, yes, maybe out of the thousands and millions of people out there and online verse, like there might be a handful that remember past tweets or past posts or past emails. Most people have a pretty short memory and or the way the
60
algorithm,
days, man. 60 days.
And I see even less than that for social. Like you could probably post the exact same thing every 30 days and people are going to feel like it's a new post every time until maybe the 4th or time that they read it.
Well,
But the idea is we're so concerned with like wanting to say something new or interesting. And the truth is you have a couple of things that are new and interesting to the rest of the world. And you just have to remind.
Yep. So this is good all around. Any other major challenge you've seen in building a business like this one?
There's quite a few of them, but I do think that one of the fastest and easiest ways to start is like you mentioned the referral thing. Like that's how I started. I have a newsletter, I have a podcast related for subscriptions, but when I'm like, hey, I'm going to go full-time consultant, I reached out to all the subscription app people that I know and say, hey, do you have customers that could use some help? And that's where the majority of my referrals have come from. And that's where a good chunk of the clients that I've worked with that have come from. Like some have come from my own network, my own work, but I think that for any business where you're talking SaaS or productizing a service, like you should be talking to like other businesses that you've worked at or work with or work for, right? And see like, hey, I'm doing this now. Because again, like the irony of ironies is I'd gone full-time consultant. I'd been doing it just a couple of weeks and I had created this like lead magnet that I was running ads for. And I had realized I hadn't shared it with my like newsletter audience. So I just share it with my newsletter audience. I'm like, you guys are already here. This is something I made. Here you go. And I get 2 emails back that are like, hey, do you do consulting? And it's like, yeah, my own email list doesn't know that I do consulting, even though I believe I've told them that. That's the world we live in, is that sometimes you just have to tell people, hey, I'm doing this. Hey, I'm doing this. Be specific. Like you mentioned specifics on asks for referrals. And I always tell people, especially with networking, is be really specific about what you're looking for. Like if you're looking for a job, and you go around telling people I'm looking for an operations job. It's like, no, I'm looking for an operations job in X. I'm really good at sourcing and fulfillment out of China and Vietnam. So if you know anybody who needs an operations person, that's what causes them to think about somebody they know. That's what causes them to remember you is something specific. When somebody just says, and that happens to me all the time, is somebody like, hey, do you know any brands that are hiring somebody for ops? I'm like, well, for what? Like a small startup and you're going to own all the hats, or fulfillment, sourcing?
Oh my gosh.
Tell me what pieces they are. Oh, well, I don't care, because you're looking for a job. So they say, well, I don't care. I'll do anything. It's like, well, that's a mistake, because I get that you'll do anything, but I'm not going to remember you. And nobody else.
More than that, if they say, I don't care, I'll do anything, I actually am not confident that they can execute. Exactly. And so if they're specific, I'm looking for a job in ops and here's what I do amazing. So impact stories are important in job hunting as well. This is what I did for a past employer. I'm really good at X, Y, or Z. Do you know anybody who's hunting around this specific job title and industry? And then I'm going to say, okay, I'm willing to trust my connections, my relationship. Dan Mazzaros, we went to breakfast and he was willing to trust that I wasn't going to mess up here talking to you enough that it would damage your relationship with him. Right. And so powerful. All right. If you could make a phone call back to Matthew and you could call him when he's literally getting that DM, the DM's coming in and this person's asking for consulting, you call Dan, what would you tell him? What piece of advice might you give him as he's just beginning that idea of mental capital that might help him scale faster or learn?
I would say spend more time figuring out what you can be really, really good at. Because the type of consulting I did then was like helping set up and manage a Shopify store, which is not my secret sauce. It took me a little bit longer to figure out that the connecting, the community building. So I've got like a community here in Utah. That's how Dan and I know each other. I'm really, really good at that. And seeing subscriptions differently than the way other people do. Those are the things that, and some of those things I've had to develop, but that's the biggest advice is what am I really, really good at that I take for granted that other people seem to be struggling or have a hard time with? Because that's the thing that can be the most valuable, you know?
What things do you jump off of a call and you feel like you're sharing common sense and the person's like, this call changed my life? What things are you sharing and you're not recognizing how valuable what you've figured out is?
Yeah. Subscriptions is this weird thing where everybody feels like, you acquire subscribers and then you keep subscribers. And so a lot of what I talk about is actually how you have acquired subscribers directly impacts how you retain subscribers. And once you start explaining that to people, a lot of what I do is actually just connecting dots. It's like, hey, if you start running all these specials and discounts and you have tons of people coming in because of discounts, and then they leave right away because they got a discount, they got what they wanted, they left. They weren't interested in a relationship. They weren't interested in a life-changing product or long-term. As soon as they see a price for something similar that's cheaper or on Amazon, they're gone, right? Yeah. So like, depending on how people come in is how you retain them. And so I think often one of the biggest things in how I start. And then also, like, we live in a world where discounts for subscriptions are the most common lever that people use to acquire and try to retain people. And there's actually like a whole host of other things that you can do, right? And so that's a lot of what I spend my time doing is like, and community and stuff like that. It's really just about like, I think we often try to force onto people what we want them to do instead of like paying attention to like, hey, I'm going to put a bunch of people in a room and see what happens and then see what they find valuable. And then I'm going to go back and do more of what they found valuable. So like, oh, the speaker, nobody really paid attention. Everybody was talking to each other. Oh, okay. Well, next time I'm not going to bring a speaker. I'm going to put out a networking game so people can talk to more people. Oh, they didn't like that. You're just trying to pay attention to what people are valuable, and figuring out how to monetize that should be a lot easier than if you're just pushing things on people.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So we're going to end the podcast. We have a very interesting ritual. We end it like this.
Okay.
I'm going to give you 60 seconds in an elevator. So you just stepped into an elevator. The guy next to you is like, yeah, I do subscriptions. So it's like, I'm an e-commerce seller, 8-figure e-commerce seller, and I do subscriptions. You realize like, oh, I'm sitting in my elevator with my ICP here. So you got 60 seconds to tell him a little bit about who you are, maybe ask him a question or two. And then right after you do that elevator 60 seconds, I'm going to ask you any tips, tricks, hacks, or books you've read in the last year that have really helped you upskill your game in business and look at. So we're going to put that one in your subconscious. It'll go around and, curate a list of things that might be interesting. But you got 60 seconds. Ready? Go.
So in my experience, working with lots of subscription brands, they often feel like they don't quite have the expertise or knowledge or focus related to subscriptions. It's obviously a key component of your business, recurring revenue, profitable customers, but people feel like it's a little bit lost. You've got a retention marketer or an email marketer who's trying to own that program. And there's not necessarily like a leader that has built program after program, optimized program after program. So a lot of what I do is coming in as like a fractional expert related to subscriptions, specifically to subscriptions that can unify your acquisition and retention strategy so that you can acquire subscribers better, but also retain them more profitably over time.
You got like 24 more seconds.
So
at this point,
the best example of that, it's not always about discounts. One of the brands that I just did a simple lunch and learn for 1 hour is Mixers here in Utah. They were able to lower their average monthly churn from 13% to 9% based off a conversation that we had when I explained to them what they could do better on their retention program.
Boom. You have 5 more seconds. But I would say at this point, the 5 more seconds is like the door's opening. He's like, do you have a business card?
Yeah, absolutely. Here we go.
I love it. I love it. All right, Matthew, what tip, trick, hack, book, or otherwise has helped you in the last year, has helped you upskill your game?
I will share actually just something from the coaching experience that I mentioned earlier. And we're all talk about blue ocean, this idea of like abundance mindset. But this idea is that we often will believe lies that are negative, that hold us back, that we aren't good enough, that we aren't pretty enough, that we aren't smart enough, right? We believe those lies and they cripple us. This whole mindset is actually believing lies, but feeding them with truth. I am good enough. And I'm now I'm going to feed that truth with stories of how I've been good enough and how I've shown up for people in the past. And then that belief is it's no longer I have to constantly counter the belief that I'm not good enough. I now actually have an active belief related to how I am good enough. And so we can actually believe things that might not feel true, but that they are enabling. So we think about what is actually enabling us and causing change. And we feed those beliefs with evidence from our life. And that can be really impactful.
That's a huge tip. If people want to reach out, understand more about, maybe get an intro to that coach that you're talking about, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, look for me on LinkedIn, Matthew Holman, or on Twitter, Subscription Doc.
Beautiful. Hey, Matthew, I appreciate your time. Well, that's it for our show today. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.